Our world was pure light, our civilization a symphony of color. We had always been told that shadows were a myth, a dangerous tale whispered in the dark corners of the galaxy. But when a monster of pure crystal came to consume us, we said no. Desperate plea to the void. We asked for the shadows to save us. And we learned that myths are only stories until they show you what they can do. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe, as it will push the video to more HFY story lovers. Also, tell me in the comments from where you are watching this video. My being is composed of pure light, a perfect resonance in the cosmic void. We are the Lumina, a civilization of artists and philosophers who exist in a constant state of harmony. Our cities are symphonies of color, our communication a dance, of frequency and tone. For eons, we have lived in peace, our non-physical forms allowing us to drift through the cosmos without the need for conflict or the burden of physical matter. Our core belief, the very foundation of our existence, is that all life is a form of light, and that understanding and cooperation are the only true paths to existence. We never built weapons, never conceived of them. Our homes were pure energy, our shields the simple logic of a perfect resonant frequency. We were safe, we were at peace. We were wrong. The first sign of their coming was a discordant hum in our outer systems, a grating, dissonant resonance that felt like a scream against the beautiful silence of space. My name is Amara, and I am a Lumina Weaver, a keeper of our history. My purpose is to ensure our perfect light shines forever. But the hum grew, and I knew in my very soul that something ancient and terrible was coming to snuff out our light. The hum grew into a roar, and then they emerged, not from a hyperspace tier, but from a gradual materialization, as if they were a virus of shattered glass infecting the cosmos. They were the Zergath Hive, a race of sentient crystal. Their ships were geometric nightmares of jagged obsidian, spires and jagged, translucent wings, shaped like colossal insects of pure crystal. They did not communicate with light or tone. They communicated with a single brutal frequency of pure dominance. Their leader, a monstrous multifaceted crystal I could only call the hive mind, sent a single message to our world: be consumed, be purified. Their technology was a twisted version of our own. They did not create, they consumed, they did not build. They absorbed. Their purpose was to convert all forms of energy and light into their perfect crystalline form. They saw our existence as an affront to their purity, and they saw our world as a source of energy to fuel their growth. Our shields of resonant frequency, which had protected us for eons, were useless. Their weapons were not fire or plasma, but beams of pure anti-light designed to extinguish a light being in an instant. Our peaceful existence was over. Our time of perfect resonance was at an end dot as our cities began to flicker and die. A single desperate thought emerged from our collective consciousness. We sent out a message, not on a physical frequency, but on a spiritual one. A deep, ancient hum that was the very sound of a dying civilization. Our message was for a myth, a legend we had only heard about in the darkest corners of the universe, a species known as the Shadow Weavers. The myth said they were beings who came from a world of both light and shadow, and that they had the capacity for both creation and destruction. The myth said they dealt in pure, brutal reality, and that they had defeated other predator species far more powerful than the Zergath. Our ancient lore described them as beings who understood violence, who were comfortable in the dark. We had always dismissed these stories as a childish fantasy, a tool to frighten our young. But as the Zergath began to harvest the light from our world, we had no other choice. Our message was simple and desperate. We are dying. We have no light to give. We ask for the Shadow Weavers to come and save us. The message traveled through the cosmos on 1,000,000 different frequencies, 1,000,000 different echoes, but it would only be heard by those who truly understood the language of desperation. 3,000 light years away, Ambassador Kalen Vance was sitting in a communication hub on the edge of a human-colonized system. His job was to listen to the whispers of the galaxy, the trade disputes, the scientific discoveries, the desperate cries of a dying species. He was a human, a being of both light and shadow, of both flesh and bone. He was also a veteran, a warrior, who understood the brutal reality of the universe. His co-pilot, Admiral Anya Petrova, was a tactical genius. They had been hiding from the rest of the galaxy for centuries, observing, learning, understanding. They had never met a light-based species before, but the desperate spiritual message of Illumina was unmistakable. It spoke not with words, but with pure, unfiltered despair. It was the sound of a civilization being extinguished. Kalen and Anya looked at each other, their faces filled with a grim determination. The Shadow Weavers were not a myth. They were real, and they were about to answer a call for help from a dying race of light beings who had no idea what they were about to unleash. Admiral Anya Petrova's face, a study in quiet intensity, appeared on the main screen of Kalen Vance's command station. Her eyes, the color of a stormy gray sky, were fixed on the data stream that contained the Lumina's desperate plea. "Their distress signal is not a transmission, Kalen," she stated, her voice a low, steady hum. "It's a resonance, a cry of pure, unfiltered despair. It's the sound of a species dying, not from a physical attack, but from an ontological one. The Zergath aren't just destroying them, they're consuming their very essence." Kalen nodded, his gaze fixed on the shimmering, holographic form of the Lumina Light City that had been replicated from the data. "They are a species of pure light. The Zergath, beings of pure crystal, are the ultimate antithesis. It's a fundamental conflict of existence." Anya's expression hardened. "The Zergath will be confident. They operate on a principle of absolute dominance and overwhelming force. They will expect a conventional opponent. We will give them a human opponent instead." Kellen's lips curled into a grim smile. "Shadows, Anya?" he asked, a hint of steel in his voice. She returned the smile. "Shadows, Kalen. The Zergath, in their crystalline arrogance, have no concept of what cannot be seen or what cannot be calculated. They see only light and its absence. We will show them that darkness has a form, that shadows have a purpose, and that a thing can be both unseen and utterly deadly. We'll be the darkness that shatters their perfect light." Our civilization had prepared for a grand entrance. We had imagined a fleet of roaring metallic beasts, spewing fire and light, ready to engage the enemy in a display of brutal strength. But as the Shadow Weavers neared our system, their arrival was different. There was no thunderous roar, no flash of a hyperspace tear. Instead, our collective consciousness felt a new presence, a cold, alien hum that rippled through the void, a silent promise of something we could not comprehend. Our sensors, our very being, struggled to categorize them. They were not light, not sound, not even a physical form that we could recognize. The Zergath, in their cold, crystalline arrogance, saw nothing. They were focused on our demise, on harvesting the last vestiges of our light. The Shadow Weavers were an enigma, a contradiction to our very being. We were the children of light, and they were the masters of shadow. We had called for a savior, and we had received a mystery. My heart, my very being, was filled with a mix of fear and an incomprehensible hope. The hive mind of the Zergath, a towering, multifaceted crystal of pure thought, dismissed the subtle shift in the system with a grating, dismissive frequency. There is no other presence. It transmitted to its fleet. The primitives are creating a new myth to soothe their demise. Continue the harvest. The Zergath were masters of conventional warfare. Their weapons could turn a gas giant into a crystalline sphere and extinguish a sun's core. They understood brute force, they understood overwhelming numbers, and they understood absolute dominance. But they had no concept of a creature that could not be seen. They had no concept of a weapon that was not meant to make a sound or a light. They were arrogant. They were perfect. They were predictable. Ambassador Kalen Vance's flagship, a vessel, made of a non-reflective nano-composite material that absorbed all light and sound, drifted through the void. The Zergath, with their crystalline eyes, saw nothing. They saw only the perfect black emptiness of space. They had no idea that they were being watched by an apex predator, a creature from a world that had mastered not only the light, but the beautiful. Brutal logic of the shadow. The Zergath armada continued its relentless attack, their anti-light beams tearing into the last bastions of our civilization. I, Amara, a weaver of stories, was now watching my own story being unwritten, our history being consumed. My essence was fading, my light growing dim. I felt the collective despair of my people. The shadow weavers had arrived. We knew that. But where were they? Our sensors screamed warnings. Our spiritual senses felt their presence. But there was no grand display of power, no thunderous charge. There was only silence. The Zergath were so focused on the light, on the brilliance of our fading cities, that they did not see the true threat. They did not see the shadows that were gathering at the very edge of their fleet. We, the Lumina, had always been a people of light. We had always believed that truth and power were found in the brilliance of a star. But now, as our very being was being consumed by the crystal, we were learning a new, terrifying truth. A truth that was waiting for us in the darkness. Admiral Anya Petrova's face was a study of cold, calculated precision as she gave the order. Her voice, devoid of any emotion, was a stark contrast to the brutal ballet of destruction that was about to unfold. The human ships, cloaked in their light-absorbing nano-composite, moved with a silent, lethal grace. The Zergath, a race of pure crystal, were predictable in their arrogance. They expected a frontal assault, a defiant charge, a display of brute force. They expected their opponent to fight with light and sound, the only mediums they understood. They expected their enemy to be like them, only weaker. They were wrong. The first volley was not a thunderous barrage of plasma or a flash of brilliant light. It was a wave of pure, condensed kinetic energy. Invisible, silent. A weapon designed by a species that had mastered the art of survival in the dark. The kinetic projectiles, no bigger than a human hand, tore through the Zergath's outer shield, a shield designed to deflect energy, not a physical object. They then penetrated the crystalline hulls of the Zergath warships, creating a perfect, silent hole in the heart of their command centers. There was no explosion, no flash of light, only a sudden, deafening silence as the Zergath warships simply went dark, their lights extinguished as if a hand had reached out from the cosmos and snuffed them out like a candle dot. My being, Amara, was filled with a growing sense of dread. The Zergath, who had just moments before been a symphony of destruction, had fallen silent. My senses, which could see and feel the light of every being, could detect no movement, no sound, no resonance from their ships. It was as if a great, monstrous mouth had opened in the cosmos and swallowed 100 of their ships whole. I was terrified. The Zergath, in their terrible, crystalline arrogance, were a force of pure light. They had no understanding of what it meant to be in a shadow. They had no understanding of a sound that was not heard, of a presence that was not seen. And so, they were baffled. I could feel their confusion, their fear. It was a new, a strange emotion for a race that had only known the logic of conquest. They were no longer the predators. They were the prey, but they had not seen their hunter. They had only seen the silence, and that silence was 1,000 times more terrifying than any explosion. It was the silence of a void, a silence that could not be explained by any of their logical calculations. Ambassador Kalen Vance watched from his command center as the Zergath fleet began to panic. Their perfect geometric formation, a symbol of their dominance, was now a chaotic mess. They were firing at the void, at the shadows, at the things they could not see or comprehend. They were firing at a ghost, and the ghost was firing back with a cold, devastating precision. The human ships, with their weapons of pure kinetic force, were like hunting wolves in the darkness. They were striking at the heart of the Zergath's fleet, at their command centers, at their energy cores, at the things that kept them alive. They were using a strategy that the Zergath, with their hive mind, could not understand. They were using a strategy that was born of a world where creatures fought in the shadows, where they used the darkness to their advantage. They were using a strategy that was so illogical, so brutal, that it had never been conceived of in the peaceful galaxy. They were not fighting a war. They were conducting a systematic, cold, and utterly merciless extermination. The hive mind, a towering, multifaceted crystal of pure thought, finally understood. It was not a physical threat they were facing. It was a psychological one. They were not fighting a conventional enemy. They were fighting a ghost, a myth, a being that had been dismissed as a legend. They were fighting a creature that had the capacity for both light and shadow, and that had chosen to use the shadow as its weapon. The hive mind's perfect, logical calculations began to fracture. Its perfect, crystalline form began to crack. It sent out a desperate, terrified signal to its fleet, a signal that was not one of command, but one of pure, unfiltered fear. It was the sound of a perfect mind being shattered by an illogical, unimaginable force. It was the sound of a predator becoming prey. It was the sound of a king being dethroned by a being that it had once dismissed as a myth. And that sound was 1,000 times more terrifying than any explosion, any scream, or any weapon. It was the sound of an entire civilization being utterly and completely broken. The shattered hive mind could do nothing but broadcast a final, desperate frequency of pure fear. Its fragmented pieces, once a monument to a perfect, unified consciousness, now screamed in a terrifying cacophony of disorganized terror. Admiral Anya Petrova, her voice still a low, steady hum, gave the order to a fleet that was poised and ready. Engage. The human ships, like a pack of wolves that had finally cornered. Their prey moved with a devastating speed that defied all logic. The Zergath, a race that had only known the brutal logic of conquest, had no defense against an opponent that was not bound by such rules. The human ships, with their weapons of pure kinetic force, tore through the Zergath's fleet, their silent attacks leading behind a trail of shattered crystal and extinguished light. The Zergath, a race that had always relied on their overwhelming numbers, were now a disorganized mob, a chaotic mess of screaming, terrified beings. They were not fighting a war, they were being hunted. And their hunters were a force of nature they could not comprehend. Ambassador Kalen Vance watched from his command center, his face a mask of quiet satisfaction. The battle had lasted less than an hour. The Zergath fleet, which had once been a testament to a perfect, unified consciousness, was now a scattered field of shattered crystal and lifeless metal. The human fleet had not suffered a single casualty. They had not lost a single ship. They had not even taken a single hit. They had simply moved in the shadows and used the darkness to their advantage. They had used the Zergath's own arrogance against them. The humans were not a race of monsters. They were a race of protectors. But they were also a race of predators, and they had just shown the galaxy what happens when a predator meets an apex predator. The battle was over. The Zergath had been defeated, but the true test had just begun. The humans now had to face the very beings they had saved. They had to face a race of pure light who had just been saved by a race of pure shadow. My being. Amara was filled with a growing sense of awe. The Zergath, who had just moments before been a symphony of destruction, were now a silent field of shattered crystal. They were gone. They were defeated. We were saved. But we had not seen our saviors. We had only felt their presence, a cold alien hum that rippled through the void, a silent promise of something we could not comprehend. We had called for the Shadow Weavers to save us, and they had answered our call. But what were they? Our sensors screamed with warnings. Our spiritual senses felt their presence. But there was no grand display of power, no thunderous charge. There was only ... silence. We were a people of light. We had always believed that truth and power were found in the brilliance of a star. But now, as our very being had been saved by the darkness, we were learning a new, terrifying truth. A truth that was waiting for us in the void. Ambassador Kaelin Vance's flagship, a vessel made of a non-reflective nano-composite material that absorbed all light and sound, drifted towards the last bastion of our civilization. The humans, with their uncanny ability to communicate, sent out a message that was not a sound, but a feeling of peace, of reassurance, of a promise of protection. We were terrified. We had just witnessed a level of violence that we had never before conceived of. But we also felt a deep sense of gratitude, of awe, of a newfound understanding. Kellen's voice, devoid of any emotion, spoke to me through the void. "We are the humans," he said, his words a single, resonant hum that rippled through my being. "We are the Shadow Weavers. We are a people of both light and shadow, and we have come to protect you." I was in awe. I was terrified, but I was also filled with a new sense of hope. We were no longer alone. We were no longer weak. We had found a savior in the darkness. We had found a protector in the shadows. I, Amara, a weaver of stories, was now witness to a new chapter in our history. The humans, the so-called Shadow Weavers, had descended upon our world. Their ships, which had been so terrifyingly silent, now hovered in the void, their presence a silent promise of protection. We, the Lumina, had prepared for a confrontation, for a brutal display of power, but what we received was a gesture of peace. The human ambassador, Kaelin Vance, and the admiral, Anya Petrova, stepped onto our world, their forms a stark contrast to our own. They were solid, physical beings, their movements a mixture of both grace and a raw, untamed power. Their eyes, which had once been so terrifying in their coldness, were now filled with a deep, quiet respect. They did not speak with words, but with a new language, a language of understanding, of shared empathy. They did not conquer us. They embraced us. We, the Lumina, who had always believed in the power of light, had found a new power in the darkness. We had found a new form of resonance, a new kind of harmony. We were no longer a civilization of pure light. We were a civilization of light and shadow, and our story was just beginning. The humans and the Lumina began to work together. We shared our knowledge of light, our understanding of the universe's most fundamental frequencies, our ability to create and to heal. They, in turn, shared their knowledge of the shadow. They taught us how to build things that did not just exist in the light, but in the dark. They taught us how to create a form that could exist in a void, a form that could absorb all light and sound. They taught us about survival, about the brutal logic of a world that was constantly trying to kill them. They taught us about a thing they called adaptability, a thing that allowed them to survive in the most hostile of environments. We had always been a people of one kind of knowledge. The humans were a people of 1,000. They were a people who had learned to survive, not by being strong, but by being smart. They were a people who had learned to be both a creator and a destroyer, and they had chosen to be a protector. We were no longer a civilization of pure light. We were a civilization of light and shadow. The news of the Zergath's defeat spread throughout the galaxy faster than light. The galaxy, which had always believed in a certain kind of order, was now faced with a new, terrifying reality. The Shadow Weavers were real, and they had come to settle a score. Other species, who had once feared them, now sought them out for protection. The humans, with their uncanny ability to communicate, established a new kind of alliance. They were not conquerors, they were guardians. They did not demand tribute. They simply asked for peace. They were a force of nature that had chosen to protect the weak, to hunt the predators, and to bring a new kind of order to the chaos of the cosmos. The galaxy, which had once been a place of brutal conquest, was now a place of hope. And we, the Lumina, were at the very heart of it all. We were a people of light who had found a protector in the darkness, and we were no longer afraid that my being, Amara, was filled with a growing sense of awe. The humans, the so-called Shadow Weavers, were not just a race of killers. They were a race of creators. They were a people of both light and shadow, and they had chosen to use the darkness to protect the light. I had once believed that a race's worth was measured by the purity of its logic and the strength of its technology. But I had been wrong. The humans had taught me a new truth, a truth that was both terrifying and beautiful. The universe was not a place of pure light or pure darkness. It was a place of both. It was a place of 1,000 colors, 1,000 sounds, 1,000 kinds of beings. And the humans, the masters of all of them, were the ultimate power. They were the ultimate protectors. They were the ultimate guardians. They were the ultimate beings. And our story, the story of the Lumina, was now a part of their grand, epic, and awe-inspiring history.